A man crosses the veil of death and is brought back with a message from Jesus himself. What he shares will shake the foundations of our understanding of destiny and prophecy. Among the revelations, one name stands out: Baron Trump, the son of former President Donald Trump. What lies ahead for this young man, and how does his fate intertwine with the tumultuous events of 2025? The answers are as chilling as they are fascinating. The story begins with an ordinary man living an unremarkable life. He wasn't the sort of person anyone would call extraordinary. He worked a steady job, paid his bills, and attended church on occasion, though not with any great fervor. For most of his life, he believed in a higher power, but never felt it intervened directly in his day-to-day existence. That belief, or lack thereof, would change in an instant during what he would later describe as the most profound and terrifying experience of his life. The day started like any other. He woke early, kissed his wife goodbye, and went to the hospital for a minor surgery, a routine procedure that doctors assured him carried little risk. He had some trepidation, as most people do before undergoing surgery, but nothing that seemed out of the ordinary. As he lay on the operating table and the anesthesia began to take effect, he closed his eyes, thinking only of how good it would feel to wake up and have the procedure behind him. But when he woke, it wasn't in the recovery room. The first sensation was one of weightlessness, as if his body had been left behind. The operating room was no longer visible. Instead, he found himself standing in an endless expanse of brilliant golden light. The light was warm, but not hot. It enveloped him completely, yet he could still see his own hands, his feet, and the contours of what he believed to be his body. There was no fear, only an overwhelming sense of peace. It was as if he had been pulled into the safest and most loving embrace imaginable. And then he saw him. Emerging from the radiant light was a figure unlike any he had ever encountered. The man fell to his knees without thinking, overwhelmed by the majesty and love emanating from this being. Though no name was spoken, he instinctively knew who it was: Jesus Christ. The face was indescribable, glowing with a beauty and kindness that surpassed all human understanding. His eyes seemed to hold the weight of eternity, and yet they looked at the man with such tenderness it brought him to tears. "You are not finished yet," Jesus said, his voice resonating in every fiber of the man's being. "You have been brought here to see so that you may tell others." The man tried to respond, but no words would come. It wasn't out of fear, but awe. His thoughts seemed to speak for him, as though his very soul was communicating without the need for sound. He wanted to ask why he was chosen, why he of all people was brought to this holy place. Jesus gestured, and suddenly the golden light began to shift. It transformed into a series of vivid images that played out before the man like scenes from a movie. He saw cities engulfed in flames, oceans rising to swallow entire coastlines, and storms of unimaginable ferocity tearing across the earth. He heard cries of anguish, the voices of countless people begging for help, for salvation. But amid the chaos, one figure stood out, a tall young man with piercing blue eyes and a solemn expression. It was Baron Trump. The man didn't know why he recognized Baron so clearly. He had only seen him in passing on the news or in photographs, yet here he was, central to the vision unfolding before him. Jesus spoke again, his voice calm but filled with urgency. "His path will shape many. What you see now is not set in stone, but it is the consequence of choices being made. You must warn them." The images continued, revealing moments from Baron's future. The young man was surrounded by a throng of people, some praising him as a leader, others condemning him as a threat. The man felt an overwhelming sense of dread as he saw Baron standing at a podium, his expression unreadable. Behind him, shadows loomed, figures in the background pulling strings, manipulating events. It was clear that Baron's role in the future was pivotal, But whether he would be a force for good or ill was uncertain. Suddenly, the vision changed again. The man saw himself lying on the operating table, surrounded by doctors and nurses frantically working to revive him. He heard their voices, panicked and urgent, shouting commands. His body lay lifeless, but he felt no fear. Jesus placed a hand on his shoulder and spoke once more. "You must go back. Tell them what you have seen. The time is short." Before the man could respond, the light began to fade. The warmth and peace were replaced by the harsh, cold reality of the operating room. He gasped for air as his heart restarted, and the medical staff erupted in relief. He was alive, but forever changed. As he lay there, recovering, the visions replayed in his mind with vivid clarity. The message was seared into his soul. He knew his life would never be the same, and he had been given a burden he could not ignore. He had seen the face of Jesus, felt his love, and heard his warning. Now he had to share it with the world, no matter the cost. After the man's miraculous return, the visions he experienced continued to haunt him, each scene etched into his memory with a clarity that no human mind should be capable of retaining. Among them, the year 2025 loomed largest, a specific moment in time that carried an unmistakable weight, as though it marked a crossroads for humanity. Each night, as he lay in bed, the details would flood back, refusing to let him rest. He saw images of the world as it would become, broken, divided, and teetering on the brink of destruction. It began with natural disasters of an unprecedented scale. He saw towering waves crashing into coastal cities, swallowing skyscrapers and sweeping away millions of lives. He saw hurricanes forming one after another, so massive that they spanned entire continents, and tornadoes ripping through urban areas, reducing them to rubble in seconds. The earth itself seemed to rebel against its inhabitants, with earthquakes cracking open the land and volcanic eruptions shrouding the skies in ash. Famine and drought followed, leaving vast stretches of the planet barren and lifeless. But these catastrophes were only the beginning. The man saw the human response to these disasters, and it was far from unified. Nations turned inward, prioritizing their own survival over cooperation. Borders hardened and tensions escalated. The global economy, already strained, collapsed under the weight of these compounded crises. Trade routes were severed, currencies devalued, and governments struggled to maintain order as their people grew increasingly desperate. Amid this chaos, the man's vision focused on Baron Trump once more. He saw the young man not as a passive observer, but as someone thrust into the very heart of these events. Baron, now older, stood tall and composed, his demeanor calm despite the storms raging around him. The man could not discern whether Baron was leading or being led, whether he was a savior or a pawn. Yet his presence was undeniable, a beacon in the swirling maelstrom of the world's collapse. Baron's role seemed to draw both adoration and animosity. The man saw throngs of people gathering around him, chanting his name and holding banners bearing his image. They seemed to believe he held the answers to their suffering, that he could guide them to safety. Yet just as many opposed him, their anger and fear manifesting in protests and violent uprisings. He was a polarizing figure, one who inspired hope in some and dread in others. The vision shifted, and the man saw a series of events that further unraveled the fabric of society. A major power, a nation he could not identify, launched an attack that sparked a chain reaction of retaliations. What began as localized skirmishes quickly escalated into a global conflict, with advanced weaponry and cyber attacks plunging the world into darkness. Satellites fell from the sky, cutting off communication and plunging humanity into isolation. Cities burned, and the air was filled with the cries of those who had lost everything. Amid this turmoil, Baron's face reappeared. This time, he stood at a podium, addressing an audience that stretched beyond what the man could comprehend. His words were powerful, delivered with an authority that belied his youth. Yet, the content of his speech remained unclear, as though the vision deliberately obscured it. The man could sense, however, that whatever Baron said had the power to unite or divide the masses further. Then came the shadowy figures. The man saw them lurking behind Baron, their faces hidden but their influence unmistakable. They whispered in his ear, their presence casting a dark pall over his actions. Were they guiding him toward greatness or manipulating him for their own sinister purposes? The man could not tell, but the unease he felt was palpable. The vision continued, showing glimpses of humanity's resilience. Small communities banded together, helping one another survive amid the chaos. Acts of kindness and bravery shone like tiny beacons of light in the darkness. Yet, these moments of hope were fragile, threatened by the overwhelming forces of destruction and despair. Finally, the man saw a critical moment, a crossroads, as Jesus had described. Baron stood at the center of it, facing two paths. One led to redemption, a future where humanity could rebuild and find peace. The other led to ruin, a descent into further chaos and suffering. Baron's choice, the man realized, would not only determine his own fate, but the fate of the world. As the vision faded, Jesus' voice echoed once more. The future is not set. What you choose today shapes what happens tomorrow. The man awoke in a cold sweat, his heart pounding. The year 2025 now carried a profound significance, a warning that demanded to be shared. He knew he had to act, to tell the world what he had seen. Time was short, and the stakes could not be higher. The vision's third chapter was one of rising tension and deep moral uncertainty, as Baron Trump's role in the chaotic world of 2025 grew more defined and more troubling. The man saw Baron standing on a precipice, both figuratively and literally. Behind him loomed the shadows of unseen forces, their whispers like a dark symphony of manipulation, while before him stretched a world desperate for leadership, unity, and hope. Baron's rise to prominence was not by choice, at least not initially. The man saw glimpses of a younger Baron, a boy burdened by the immense expectations of his family name. The Trump legacy cast a long shadow, and though Baron had lived much of his life out of the public eye, 2025 saw him thrust unwillingly into the spotlight. The circumstances of this emergence were murky in the vision, but it was clear that events beyond his control had set him on this path. Whether it was a family crisis, a political upheaval, or some other pivotal moment, Baron became a figure that the world could not ignore. At first, the world viewed him with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. Here was a young man, barely out of his teens, suddenly positioned as a central player in global affairs. Some saw him as a puppet, a mere extension of his father's controversial legacy. Others saw him as a blank slate, untainted by the corruption and cynicism that plagued the older generation of leaders. Still, others projected their fears and hopes onto him, elevating him to a symbolic status he neither sought nor seemed to understand fully. The man's vision showed Baron grappling with these conflicting perceptions. In private moments, Baron appeared torn, his expression a mix of determination and doubt. He seemed to wrestle with an internal struggle, one that mirrored the external chaos unfolding around him. The man could feel Baron's reluctance to take on the mantle of leadership, but he could also see the weight of the world pressing down on him, compelling him to act. As Baron's influence grew, so too did the forces surrounding him. The vision showed shadowy figures converging around him, their faces obscured, but their intentions palpable. These were powerful individuals and organizations, politicians, business moguls, and secretive groups, each with their own agendas. They saw in Baron an opportunity to shape the future to their liking, and they were determined to mold him into a tool for their purposes. The whispers grew louder. They fed Baron ideas, strategies, and promises, each laced with subtle manipulation. They painted a picture of a world that could be saved, but only if he followed their guidance. At first, Baron resisted. The man saw him pushing back, questioning their motives, and trying to forge his own path. But the pressure was relentless, and the lines between truth and deception became increasingly blurred. The vision shifted, showing moments of decision that would define Baron's trajectory. In one scene, Baron stood before a group of advisors, their faces obscured by shadow. They presented him with a choice, one that carried profound consequences. The man could feel the tension in the air, the weight of the decision pressing down on Baron. Though the details of the choice were unclear, its significance was undeniable. The wrong decision, the man sensed, could plunge the world into deeper chaos. Amid this struggle, the man saw glimpses of Baron's inner turmoil. He sought solace in moments of quiet, retreating to a private space where he could think and reflect. There, he seemed to wrestle with his conscience, questioning not only the advice he was receiving, but also his own abilities and motives. The man felt a profound sense of empathy for Baron in these moments, recognizing the immense burden placed upon such young shoulders. Yet, the vision also hinted at a darker possibility. The whispers of the shadowy figures grew more insistent, their promises more tempting. They spoke of power, control, and the ability to reshape the world in his image. They fed into his doubts, suggesting that only he had the strength and vision to lead humanity out of its current crisis. The man could feel the allure of their words, the seductive pull of their influence. The vision ended with a chilling scene. Baron stood at the crossroads once more, the two paths stretching out before him. The man could feel the weight of the decision, the immense stakes that hung in the balance. Baron's face was unreadable, his expression a mask of determination and uncertainty. The shadowy figures stood behind him, their presence a constant reminder of the forces vying for control of his destiny. As the vision faded, the man was left with a profound sense of urgency. He understood that Baron's struggle was not just his own. It was a reflection of humanity's broader struggle between light and darkness, hope and despair. The choices Baron made would reverberate far beyond his own life, shaping the future of a world already teetering on the edge. As Baron Trump's journey unfolded, the forces around him intensified. The man, in his visions, saw the world converging upon the young Trump with a ferocity that was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. Baron had become a figure of immense importance, not because of anything he sought, but because of what he symbolized in a world unraveling at the seams. The vision began with Baron's isolation. Despite the throngs of people who surrounded him, advisors, supporters, critics, and opportunists, he seemed profoundly alone. The man saw him standing in a vast room, its grandeur a stark contrast to his internal struggle. The walls were lined with portraits of leaders from ages past, their stern gazes seeming to judge him. Baron's face was a mask of composure, but his eyes betrayed a deep inner conflict. He was a young man caught between expectation and self-doubt, between the weight of his family's name and his desire to carve his own path. Outside this room, the world's chaos raged on. The man's vision shifted, showing scenes of despair and desperation. Riots erupted in major cities as people clamored for food, water, and shelter. Governments, already weakened by years of corruption and mismanagement, struggled to maintain order. Alliances crumbled, and old rivalries flared anew. Amid this turmoil, Baron's name became a rallying cry for some and a lightning rod for others. His every word, every action was dissected and debated, magnified by the unrelenting glare of a global audience. Barron's family, too, was not spared from the storm. The man saw Donald Trump, older now, his once dominant presence diminished, but still formidable. The elder Trump tried to shield his youngest son from the onslaught, but even his influence had limits. The vision revealed moments of tension between father and son, heated arguments behind closed doors, where Donald implored Barron to listen, to be cautious, to trust no one. Yet there was also a palpable sense of pride, as though Donald recognized something in Barron that even he could not fully understand. Barron's mother, Melania, was also present in the vision, a figure of quiet strength. She rarely spoke in public, but her presence was a stabilizing force for Barron. The man saw her standing beside him during key moments, her hand on his shoulder, her eyes filled with concern. She was his anchor, the one person who seemed to understand the depth of his internal struggle. Yet even her support could not shield him from the forces that sought to manipulate him. The man's vision shifted again, revealing the hidden players behind the scenes. These were the individuals and groups who saw Barron not as a person, but as a means to an end. They came from all walks of life: politicians, corporate executives, military leaders, and religious figures. Some were open in their intentions, offering alliances and support in exchange for influence. Others operated in the shadows, their motives shrouded in secrecy. One particularly chilling scene showed Barron meeting with a group of these shadowy figures. The room was dark, illuminated only by a single dim light. The faces of the figures were obscured, but their voices were clear, each one articulate and persuasive. They spoke of unity, of rebuilding the world, of seizing an opportunity to create a new order from the ashes of the old. Their words were seductive, laced with promises of power and greatness. They appealed to Barron's sense of responsibility, urging him to take up the mantle of leadership for the sake of humanity's survival. But their intentions were far from pure. The man could feel the darkness in their words, the underlying deceit. These were not people who sought to save the world, they sought to control it. They saw in Barron a young, malleable figure, someone who could be shaped and guided to serve their interests. They spoke of trust, but their actions revealed their true nature. They planted seeds of doubt in Barron's mind, turning him against those who genuinely cared for him. The vision returned to Barron, now sitting alone in a quiet room, his face buried in his hands. The weight of the world seemed to press down on him, and the man could feel his anguish. Barron was not naive. He understood the stakes, the manipulations, and the dangers that surrounded him. Yet, he was also acutely aware of the hope people had placed in him, the belief that he could be a beacon of light in the darkness. This duality, being both a potential savior and a potential pawn, was tearing him apart. The man saw moments where Barron tried to assert his independence, to push back against those who sought to control him. In one scene, he stood before a crowd, delivering a speech that was both defiant and inspiring. His words carried a message of hope, resilience, and unity, and for a moment, the shadows seemed to retreat. But these moments were fleeting, as the forces aligned against him were relentless. The vision ended with a stark reminder of the stakes. The man saw Barron standing on a stage, surrounded by a sea of faces. The crowd was silent, their eyes fixed on him, waiting for his next move. Behind him, the shadowy figures loomed, their presence a constant reminder of the forces pulling the strings. Barron's expression was unreadable, a mixture of determination and uncertainty. The man felt a chill as he realized the immense burden resting on this young man's shoulders. As the vision faded, the man was left with a profound sense of both hope and dread. He understood that Barron's struggle was not just his own, It was a reflection of humanity's broader battle between good and evil, freedom and control. The outcome was uncertain, but one thing was clear. The choices Barron made would resonate far beyond his own life, shaping the destiny of a world hanging by a thread. The final chapter of the man's vision was the most vivid, the most urgent, and the most terrifying. It was not just a culmination of the events he had already witnessed. It was a call to action, a final warning from a higher power about the fragility of the future and the role that every individual must play to determine its outcome. The vision began with Barron Trump standing at a literal and metaphorical crossroads. Behind him stretched the path of destruction the man had already seen: burning cities, devastated landscapes, and the cries of millions lost in despair. Ahead of him lay two divergent roads, each shrouded in mystery. One was illuminated with a soft golden light, promising renewal and hope. The other was cloaked in darkness, a foreboding tunnel leading to an uncertain but deeply unsettling destination. Barron stood still, his face a mask of contemplation. In this moment, the man saw not just a young man struggling with an impossible choice, but the embodiment of a global dilemma. Barron was no longer just a person. He was a symbol for the collective will of humanity. The forces surrounding him, the manipulators, the loyal supporters, the skeptics, waited with bated breath, knowing that his decision would ripple across the world. As the scene unfolded, the man saw the consequences of each path. The road bathed in golden light revealed a world transformed. Humanity, battered and bruised by the disasters and conflicts of 2025, had begun to heal. People from all walks of life came together, setting aside their differences to rebuild. New technologies emerged, not as tools of division, but as instruments of unity and progress. Economies stabilized, and nations worked collaboratively to address the planet's most pressing challenges, from climate change to inequality. It was a vision of what could be achieved if humanity chose faith, compassion, and courage over fear and division. But the other path was darker, so much darker. The man saw scenes of unrelenting chaos. Nations descended into tyranny, each seeking to protect its own interests at the expense of others. The shadowy figures from earlier visions grew more powerful, their influence unchecked as they manipulated events to serve their own ends. Technology, instead of uniting humanity, became a tool of oppression, with surveillance and control reaching unprecedented levels. The natural world, already ravaged, was pushed to the brink, and humanity's final descent into despair seemed inevitable. In this darker vision, Barron himself was transformed. No longer the hesitant, conflicted figure at the crossroads, he had become something else entirely. His face was cold, his eyes devoid of the empathy and warmth the man had glimpsed earlier. He stood on a podium, delivering speeches to adoring crowds, but the words he spoke were laced with veiled threats and hollow promises. Behind him, the shadowy figures smiled, their influence complete. The man felt a shiver of dread as he realized that Barron had not simply chosen the darker path, he had become its leader. The vision shifted, pulling the man out of these stark dichotomies and placing him in a more personal, intimate scene. He was back in the radiant presence of Jesus, whose face was filled with both sorrow and hope. Jesus spoke again, his words resonating with an authority that could not be ignored. "What happens next is not for him alone to decide," Jesus said, referring to Barron. "The world watches and waits, but the choice belongs to everyone. Each person has the power to shape the future. It is their prayers, their actions, and their faith that will determine the outcome." The man felt an overwhelming sense of responsibility as he absorbed these words. This was not just about Barron Trump or the events of 2025. It was about the collective power of humanity to choose its destiny. Every small act of kindness, every moment of courage, every decision to stand up for what was right, these were the things that would tip the balance. Jesus continued, his voice filled with both urgency and compassion. Do not wait for a savior. Be the light in the darkness. Be the hand that reaches out to lift others. The future is not set, but the window for change is closing. The vision then showed glimpses of individuals around the world, ordinary people doing extraordinary things. A single mother in a war-torn region risking her life to protect her children. A scientist working tirelessly to find solutions to the planet's most pressing problems. A group of activists rallying to bring attention to the forgotten and the voiceless. These moments, small on their own, combined to form a tapestry of hope and resilience. It was a reminder that even in the darkest times, the human spirit could endure and prevail. Finally, the man saw himself. He was no longer an observer, but an active participant in the vision. He was speaking to a crowd, sharing the message he had been given. His words were simple but powerful, urging those who listened to take action, to believe in the power of unity and faith. The crowd's faces were filled with a mix of skepticism and determination, but as he continued to speak, he saw their expressions change. Hope began to flicker in their eyes, and he knew that his message was reaching them. The vision ended abruptly, leaving the man gasping for air. He was back in his hospital bed, surrounded by the sterile whiteness of the room. The weight of what he had seen pressed down on him, but so too did a newfound sense of purpose. He understood that the visions were not just warnings, they were a call to action. The man knew that his journey was only beginning. He had been given a glimpse of what could be, both the good and the bad. Now, it was his responsibility to share that vision, to inspire others to choose the path of light and redemption. The fate of 2025, and perhaps the fate of humanity, depended on it.